music, stories, and more. You're listening to Artbeat Radio, a program by Able Arts Work.
Welcome to Artbeat Radio. My name is Brian, and I'm interviewing Stephen. Welcome. Would you please introduce yourself?
The name is Stephen Probst, and I live in Long Beach, and I'm over 21. And I'm currently unemployed and not looking for work, otherwise known as retired, from what I used to do. But actually not retired. I'm a part-time writer, part-time columnist for a very, very local newspaper, and a collector of old phonograph records, those vinyl things that are now replacing CDs.
Oh yeah, I had a CD 40 years old this year.
Oh yeah, I think CD started to be exact, started in 1982, and it's rest in peace about 2023. No one messes with them anymore, although they're still being produced. I write liner notes for a company in England called Ace Records, and they still send me CDs once it's pressed up.
What is your background and what jobs have you had?
Oh, okay. You mean outside of the CIA? Yeah, that's good. I'm glad you caught that. I worked for the County of Los Angeles quite some time. I'm a graduate of Cal State Long Beach when it was known as Long Beach State. And it was a small campus with muddy parking lots and police officers that drove gray Studebakers back in the time. That was way back when. And I retired from my full-time work in 1981 because I was tired of my 10 years of working. That's just way too long to be employed by someone else. That's a joke too, because I took some time off. Sylvia and I went to Europe in '68 and bought a VW van and camped around there like a couple of hippies and took in everything, well, not everything, but a lot of things that were there to be taken in.
How long were you in Europe?
3 months. The day we left, 2 months, I'm being coached, 2 months, May through the first part of July. And during that period, there was a lot of, this is 1968, there were riots in America, there were riots in France, there was discord everywhere because the day we left, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. We drove across the country in a '59 VW Bug. That's how comfortable we were. The day we left, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, and while we were in Europe, Robert Kennedy was assassinated. So, but we also saw huge demonstrations in Paris, and there was a lot of discord going on. So we didn't miss all the activity, just some of it. You know, there was Vietnam War demonstrations. It was racial demonstrations, riots. Cities we were in were under siege. So it was a pretty complete trip. Pardon me?
Did you like Europe?
Did I like it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Way different. We learned, you know, about Europe. It's weird how very few people in America speak a foreign language. But in Europe, France, Germany, Switzerland, almost everybody speaks English. Now you figure it out. Why is that? Is it because we're ubiquitous, we're everywhere at once, and they have to learn our ways and we don't bother to learn their ways? I don't make that as a statement, I just offer that as a question, a speculative question.
What kind of education do you need for doing? What do you do?
Oh, not much, really. I'm, I have a Bachelor of Arts, but I haven't really, well, I qualified for one job based on the fact the guy told me anybody that has your level of education could do this job, so we'll hire you. That wasn't exactly a very promising start to my world of work, so I did that for a while. And then, what kind of education? Just learning as you go along. I've been collecting old records, like I told you, old vinyl, since I graduated from high school, and I will not divulge the year because that might give away my elderly status. But safe to say, it's many, many decades, and over the years, I've learned a lot about records to the extent that I've written, hard to count, 8 books, one currently on the market called Those Old School Records, about details about 1,000 records, interviews with people from artists who sang on the records like Curtis Mayfield and Ike Turner, to personalities who also like records like George Carlin. I've interviewed them all, and I use their quotes in parts of the book. I could tell you about Ike Turner. I think I don't want to say it. He took a long time to get to the microphone. He spent a lot of time in the bathroom before the interview. Draw your own conclusions. Curtis Mayfield was an absolute delight. Wonderful guy who got grievously hurt and paralyzed the day after in a bad accident at a concert site when a microphone, part of a structure for a concert he was at, fell on him. George Carlin, I had interviewed because he used to listen to my radio show, and he liked the music I was playing. He wanted to go on the air and talk about it because there's very little attention paid to that particular type of music. Early New York City rhythm and blues, before rock and roll came on the scene, or just at the time rock and roll came on the scene. And then he contacted me, I forget how it happened, a few years later, and said, I'll come down and do your cable TV show if I can send you a tape and you tell me who's on this tape. And I happen to know who was on the tape, the most obscure performers you ever heard of in your life. Nobody has ever heard of them, but I happened to have a friend who made the tape, so he told me who was on them. So he came into my cable TV show here in Long Beach. It's actually in Signal Hill, and spent an hour talking about music.
What age were you when you started getting interested in music?
How old was I?
Yeah.
Well, I was graduating from... Do you know what a drive-in restaurant is?
Yeah.
Where there's car hops?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. There was a restaurant or a location just like that here in Long Beach at the intersection of PCH and Anaheim, down the street from here. And I and a friend who had a car, I didn't have a car, we would, like every other teenager who had a car at the time, would cruise the drive-ins and cruise down several streets around town here in Long Beach. And he had a record player in his car. So he would play records real loud, just like you hear boom boxes these days.
Yes.
Some guy cruises by with hip-hop music, where I'm pretty sure he'll be not hearing much in the future because it's so loud. We used to do that with 45s, old records, that were, people would wonder, what's that song? You never heard it on the radio, and sort of be showing off, tell you the truth. So we would cruise drive-ins listening to oddball records, and I sort of thought, well, you can't find these anywhere. They're totally unknown. I might as well start collecting them while I can. That really is the start of everything. store, and I'd see dividers between records that said this one is no longer available. And I thought, well, I better buy these while they're still available because they won't be available for long, and I was right. Nothing's available now unless you want to pay a price for it.
Do you remember what the very first final record that you had?
Good question. The answer is no. No. There's several candidates, both sort of off-color titles. Not dirty, just suggestive. 60 Minute Man by the Dominoes, big hit in 1951, great record. Or Work With Me Annie by Hank Ballard and the Midnighters from 1954. Those were among the first candidates for records I bought. There were records about drinking, all the fun stuff.
How many records did you have?
Good question. Latest count about 45 is about 35,000. But
35,000.
I know people that have 2 million. There's, a dealer in Philadelphia has a 4-story building with 2 million records packed inside of it. I'm small change compared to some collectors. Well, who do you listen to?
Thank you for asking.
You're welcome.
I listened to the Beatles.
Okay.
The Rolling Stones.
Okay.
I had many K-Tel records when that was big.
Well, that's the ones you order off of TV, huh?
Yeah. And I had Huey Lewis in the News.
So you like
Whitney Houston.
Classic rock, sort of?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, we could be here all day for me naming everybody that we had, but I don't think we've got enough time for that.
Well, if we're here all day, I'll expect to have a lunch. I don't do this on an empty stomach, believe me.
Do you play any instruments?
Do I what?
Do you play any musical instruments?
No. That's the easiest question I've gotten so far. But none of my forebears, that means my ancestors that I know of, including my parents, ever played an instrument or had any interest in music at all. I'm one of a kind when it comes to, in fact, my parents didn't exactly appreciate that I was collecting records because I stored them in my room and they got to be sort of a hassle.
I heard you were an author. What would you write? What did you write, and do you have any advice for me?
Well, most of the books I've written are about collecting records. I wrote the first book on rare rock and roll records when nobody knew what was rare and what to look for. And certain people got angry with me because I divulged secret information. But my theory was it's better to have people informed about old records as opposed to people that like to throw them in the trash, because that happens a lot. You'd be surprised, people move out of a house and leave their records behind, or just, put them in the landfill. And I thought, well, maybe if I write this book, people will become aware that certain records are desirable and won't trash them. Now, writing novels, I've done one novel, but I haven't really promoted it. It's sort of a fantasy sci-fi, but I'm sort of making changes to it, so I'm not going to talk about that too much, at all.
Well, I I kind of understand.
Well, I'm glad. Thank you.
Do you have any advice that you would give anybody who is entering the field in any of your jobs that you've had?
Well, I don't really have any because things change so much. Situations change. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it was fairly easy to find old records that were of interest from the 1950s and 1960s. Now it's much more difficult because all the good records have been snapped up or destroyed. So just start, if you want to collect records, just start with what you like, and like you do, you told me what you like, so you concentrate on that. But understand that vinyl is coming alive again this year.
That's what I understand.
Yeah, this year, more vinyl records were produced than CDs, which is sort of eye-opening because it's only been 40 years since CDs have been on the scene, and they almost killed the vinyl record industry. But vinyl records have come back. But when it comes to classic titles like Creedence Clearwater,
Yep.
even new wave artists like the Ramones and some of them, what you find at some of the big box stores like Walmart are records that are taken off of, the sound is taken off of CDs. It isn't taken off the original tapes. So it's not as authentic as the original albums are. There's collector record shops in Long Beach, like Fingerprints downtown, and Dizzy's on 7th Street, and other record stores around town where you can find original pressings of records that aren't too expensive. If you're interested in putting a collection together, I'd say check out, for people locally, and this is true in most towns, check out rare record shops in your town. You might find something that you didn't know you could actually acquire at a fairly reasonable price in most cases.
But I'm curious what the most expensive record that you've encountered might be.
There was a Beatles record. This is sort of I'm not going to name the record or the transaction, but a single by the Beatles, of which only maybe under a handful of copies are known, went for $25,000. But the guy could have gotten $30,000 if he had taken a check. But if he had taken a check, he would have had to report that to the government and ended up netting less money. So he took the 25 grand in cash. But it's a sad story. It was a friend of mine. He told me about it. He was liquidating his collection because he got Parkinson's disease and had to go into a care home. And he made about between $150,000 and $200,000 on his collection. But that basically probably vanished in a couple of months. Another person I know who was a medical doctor, there was a record that Motown Records put out. You know Motown, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Temptations, the Supremes.
Right. This is a record by a guy named Frank Wilson, and it was about to be released, and Berry Gordy went to Frank Wilson, who had written a lot of songs for other artists, and said, do you want to be a songwriter or do you want to be a recording artist? He gave him that choice, and Frank said, I want to be a songwriter. So Berry Gordy chose not to release that record. There were 2 copies of that record in Motown files. This other collector I know, who was a medical doctor, medicine always seems to work its way into my stories, or these two stories, was supplying drugs to, he was not a very ethical doctor. He was supplying drugs to a guy that worked at Motown in exchange for records, Quaaludes. So he gave him enough Quaaludes that the guy filched one copy out of the files at Motown and gave it to him, and it was sold for about the same amount, $25,000, 2 copies known, both, one of which was stolen from Motown. I sort of understand that the other copy disappeared too. There's a scene in England called the Northern Soul scene. You know what soul music is?
Yeah.
Okay. This is music with a Motown beat, but not a Motown backbeat, but not by Motown artists. And people in certain dance clubs in England take pills and dance all night. They have all-nighters listening to this music. Those records are very desirable and very expensive. And this was suited, this Motown record I told you about was suited to the Northern Soul scene in England. Isn't it amazing how pills and medical profession ties into all this? There's a book there somewhere, or a movie. You know, have you heard of the Capitol Records Tower in Hollywood?
Yeah,
It was built to look like a stack of 45s.
yeah, my mom and dad drove past that one time.
Well, there was a parking lot near the Capitol Records Tower, and a record meet used to be held there once a month. And the oddest assortment of people would come through there looking for records. And people tried to get there early to get the best records, and they kept getting there earlier and earlier until they were coming at the middle of the night, and then before midnight, and pretty soon it was an all-night swap meet. So people would wear miner's helmets with lights on them like you're going into a mine to look at records. People are camping out to look at records. It's an obsession. It's like collecting anything. If you get too deep into it, it sort of takes over your life. Luckily, my daughter likes old blues records and rock records, so she just put together a Doors collection. And she's much younger than when the Doors were popular.
Does your daughter connect records like you do?
Well, not exactly like I do. She likes LPs. I like 45s, but I have LPs, and I've passed quite a few LPs on to her.
How many does she have?
Oh, let's see. She has 4 boxes of 45s, and I'd say maybe 600 to 700 45s, which is very small, and maybe 300 LPs. So she's just getting started.
Thank you, Stephen, for coming. This was a very good conversation.
Well, thank you for asking your questions. Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Were any of your other guests less serious than I was? Or were they more professional, which I wasn't?
They were more professional.
That's because I don't have a profession right now. I just have many
Should
things I do.
Should I?
Well, anyway, good questions. I'm glad you were interested. I'm glad you have records and CDs and all that.
And may I ask, can we have him back again?
That's up to him.
Yeah,
Would you like to come back again?
yeah, sure. But let's give it a little time and see if people react to it and say, if you ever do this again, I'll never listen to your podcast again. Let's see what the general tone of the reaction of your fan base is.
I hope you enjoyed this installment of Artbeat Radio.
more information, please go to our website, ableartwork.org. Thank you for listening and tune in next